Support for Arts Weekly is provided by PBS 39, the Our Foundation, Martin Tierney, and the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne.
For nearly 60 years, Arts United has worked to bring the rich, diverse talents of our region together through support of the arts, socially, culturally, and economically. Arts United, providing a home for the arts in Northeast Indiana.
This is Arts Weekly. Arts Weekly is produced in cooperation with the College of Visual and Performing Arts at IPFW, offering degrees in fine arts, music, theater, and visual communication and design.
Welcome to Arts Weekly. I'm John O'Connell, Dean of the IPFW College of Visual and Performing Arts. This week is all about art a little outside the norm. In the second half of the show, steampunk sculptor Mark Fennessy will share his unique story as this week's featured Fort Wayne artist. But first, I'm joined by Charles Shepard, Executive Director of the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, who's here to talk about the 42nd Annual International Glass Invitational and other summer events happening at the museum. Charles, welcome back to Arts Weekly.
Thank you, John. Delighted to be here.
I feel so fortunate to have you back on the show. Seems like you were just here yesterday, but it's been a whole year, I think.
It has been a whole year, but we've got lots to chat about.
We do have a lot to chat about. Well, I want to start a little bit and talk about your background first, because my producers who helped me out by doing a little bit of research on you, I found out some interesting stuff about that I'd like to talk a little bit about.
Okay.
Well, first of all, you have quite an educational background in the arts as a fine artist and as an educator.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about
Yes.
that, because I don't think our viewers understand sort of your eclectic background.
Well, it never was my first option, actually, to work in museums. I simply wanted to be an art history professor. I favored the Renaissance. I had, as you say, a studio background too. I could mess around, but I didn't have to worry about the income.
Right.
And yet, when I went out there, number one, nobody was hiring anybody in Renaissance, so that was a problem. Mm-hmm. And then secondarily, my graduate, sort of job was in a museum, and I had so much fun I didn't want to give it up. Mm-hmm. So I found that you could get appointed to run the museum and be on the faculty.
Right.
So I did that for a lot of years.
So when you had faculty positions, what kind of positions did you have? Were they strictly art history? Or
Yes.
They were?
Yeah.
And then you did the museum, whichever connected to. What were some of the institutions that you worked for?
Well, I immediately went to the University of Michigan, and then I got hired away from University of Michigan to University of Maine, where I was an alum originally, and from University of Maine, where I founded a museum. Somebody had left that institution and gone to Ohio University and said, I want to bring you with me. Oh. So I went down and found a museum for them, the Kennedy Museum of American Art. And these things just sort of translated that way. Connecticut College before here. This was my first non-university job.
Non-university job at the museum. Did you enjoy teaching?
Oh, I loved it.
You
I
did?
loved it. But
Yeah.
I had no understanding of, for instance, the politics of all of this. And I would teach courses, for example, beyond what I was being paid to teach, just for the fun of teaching.
Right.
And
everybody else said,
everybody's
that's a bad
paid.
example for us, Charles.
That's
Stop
right,
teaching
faculty.
that.
That's
We
right.
get paid to teach extra. It's called overload.
That's right.
That's right.
You know exactly what
I know
mean.
exactly what
Yeah.
you're talking about. Well, where's your education, though? Where are you from originally?
Well, I'm from Maine.
Okay.
And I'll go way, way back in history and tell you something that I've never told anybody.
Okay.
But actually, I accidentally got into the whole art thing because I mowed the lawn and trimmed the bushes for a guy named William Zorak, a famous New York sculptor who had a summer place there. And they paid, in my mind, better than the locals.
Right, exactly.
And he got a kick out of my little opie self.
Right.
And so he started asking me to help him, stretch a canvas or prime this or prime that. And I was fascinated with his world. I didn't understand anything about it, but I loved it. And that made me want to go to school for art.
And only now, as adults, do we understand what that gentleman gave you.
So true.
As a kid who was mowing his lawn, you're like, okay, he's going to pay me extra to stretch a canvas.
Yeah,
How do I
right.
know that it's going to instill in me a completely new love of something?
That's right. And a whole career path.
Right.
You know,
right. Because
I
people
never
would have
done
paid.
it.
What if people would have paid to go
Yeah,
there to
exactly.
spend summertime with him?
I'm sure they would have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's terrific. But you said you did dabble a little bit in your own art.
Well, I did, and he, through the experience in the studio with Mr. Zorak, he made me want to make things, and I made them and made more. And you know, and in college, I immediately went to those courses first, and I thought, well, you know, but as you're making things, I better be informed about other people who've made things, and I was better at being informed about making than I was making.
Well,
and
it's a good realization.
Yeah, and the second good realization is at a certain point in time, you've got to be honest in your own critique.
Right.
And I looked at my work and thought, am I going to be in an art history book ever? Am I going to change anything ever? Upwardly, no. Right. So I thought, I'll make a little bit for fun, but I'll get serious about my art history.
Right, right. And where did you study that?
Well, I studied that at University of Maine first, and then Williams College.
Oh, okay. And so what is your advanced degree?
I'm Master's of Art History.
Oh, okay.
And,
wonderful.
And I got that at the center there at Williams, and it was the best experience in the world.
And what turned you on about Renaissance? Because you say that you're more of a Renaissance expert than other areas.
I was at first because I think the time, you know, the time was so rich that I think every art history student holds that as the, you know, the
pinnacle.
High, the pinnacle.
Okay,
and,
right.
And yet, and nobody when you're a student thinks about what's going to be employable.
Right.
And because of I made contemporary art, I liked contemporary art too, and I was a specialist in theory and application of theory. So shifting to contemporary when the jobs appeared was really pretty easy for me. So I could let the Renaissance go. It was fine. There were plenty of people covering it probably better than I would have.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I got to work with things that are happening, you know, right now. And I was very lucky to have positions that got me into New York all the time, and had a New York apartment for, oh God, almost a decade. And so you really could be, you know, throughout the 80s, everything that happened the next day, I was probably there.
Right. A lot of contemporary stuff happening in New York in the 80s and 90s. A lot of movement towards contemporary art. I lived in New York 83 to 95.
Yeah.
And
actually
I actually did a little bit what you did for Richard Archwager.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Richard Archwager was a contemporary modern artist who worked in Formica. And I actually lived in his apartment in his home.
That is wonderful.
And the same thing, I was a starving artist, a starving actor, theater person. He was like, I need someone to shellac this stuff for me. You know, I was like, okay, I'll do that. After I go to his retrospective at the Whitney, I'm like, wait a minute, you're still alive and you're having a retrospective?
That's right. You're pretty famous.
You're pretty famous. I didn't know it, but at the time anyway.
Very well respected man.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you're in New York, you get to run across that kinds of stuff.
You do.
Yeah, exactly.
You do.
So what brought you to Fort Wayne?
Well, it's interesting because I was not happy with the direction that Connecticut College was going with their museum. And it was a big sea change from when I was hired. It was a president change. The president had a different perspective, different priorities. I understand that. And I work for the president, so you know, that's just going to work or not.
Right.
And so I cast, you know, my hat in a couple of different rings, and I've been lucky for the last 20 years. 2 or 3 headhunters have followed my career, so you usually get calls every spring. And I got a call from Ponce, Puerto Rico. I got a call from San Francisco. I got a call from Bath, England, and I got a call from Fort Wayne.
Wow.
And Fort Wayne was very interesting to me.
But that list is a pretty impressive list to end up in Fort Wayne. So
I was honored. I was really flattered.
Absolutely.
And they were all good positions and fun places to be and everything. But the biggest difference was they were all very well-defined programs, and they were not looking for change or, you know, uniqueness. They were what they were, or growth. Yes, they pretty much were established. And I liked what the Fort Wayne Museum had done. I immediately saw things they could do that people weren't thinking about. And so I called the head hunter back and said, yeah, you know, arrange a meeting. I'll go.
Absolutely, sure.
And I had a great time.
Now, how long ago was that?
Oh, that's 2003.
Oh, okay.
2003.
All right.
And in, you know, late February it started. You know, not the best time to come to out here.
Fort Wayne. Now let's say I could have gone to Puerto Rico, and here I am in a snowstorm.
And save that Fort Wayne for May.
Exactly right. So we're here to talk about the Glass Invitational. This is the second.
This is the second, and we contextualize this in what we call the Summer of Glass, because we devote the whole summer to 2 or 3 special glass shows. This time, 2 of the galleries will be filled with the work of Peter Bremers, really wonderful, remarkable contemporary glass sculptor from the Netherlands. And then the 42nd Invitational competition winners will be in the third gallery. So more glass than you could shake a stick at.
And so that second one is a juried competition of national
Yes.
submissions to come to Fort Wayne. And I just want to point out, Charles, that one of the things I appreciate about what you do at the museum is you create these shows.
Yes.
These aren't road shows you buy off of a track that
That's right.
somebody's doing. You go out and you do the effort, and you have the great staff that go ahead and put out all of these notices for a national show. This isn't easy to do. This takes administrative work and a commitment from the museum, both financially, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's good. I really appreciate when somebody recognizes that, because you go crazy doing these things.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you wonder, you know, is it going to be worth it? But it really is.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah. So is it the second annual because it was so successful last time? I mean,
Well, that and summer seemed to be a time to me that people would be traveling, so we could bring people to Fort Wayne who'd love to see the show. It's easy to travel, obviously, in the summer, but also people have time off, vacations, and so on and so forth. And last year we did. We brought people from, you know, probably 7 states around, and that's what we know. Now, also people flew in from other places, collectors, and that's a little harder to track because some of them don't divulge exactly where they're from.
Right.
But we really extended our reach a lot, which is important.
Plus, I don't know, I'm sort of naive in this, but doesn't glass feel like a summer show?
It kind of
It's
does.
just light,
Yeah,
it's pretty, it's airy, it's got
wants
breath
that
in
kind
it.
of- yeah.
You know, it's not, it feels like a summer event for me. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll tell you something fascinating too about mixing these two kinds of shows. You know, Peter obviously has 3 or 4 themes that he's been working on for the last year or so, and those will have a certain relatedness, a certain look. Now, the International, you know, you've got a lot of very different people. So somebody is blowing glass, somebody's casting glass, somebody is doing some other crazy process that nobody's ever done before. The work all looks different, and it's like being in a candy store. You just don't know what to pick.
How many pieces do you expect to?
Oh, I think we'll have probably 48 pieces.
in both shows?
Oh,
Or the
in both
Invitational?
shows we'll probably have almost 70 pieces.
Oh,
It's
terrific.
a lot of
Yeah.
glass.
What is the time span of the show again? I don't think we
Well,
got the details.
it opens at the end of June,
Okay.
and then it runs all summer. We go up to about Labor Day.
August 31st, it says, according to our little sheet that's up.
So-
And for more information, you can call 260-422-6467, or you can go to www.fwmoa.org for more information on the 42nd Annual International Glass Invitational Exhibition.
And I think people will like it.
I know they'll like it. I'm a big fan of glass, so I'll be walking through several times, I hope. Charles, it's great to have you on Arts Weekly again.
Thank you.
We always seem to run out of time, though. Next time I have to
But
have
that's
you
fun.
on to talk
That's
about
fun.
other summer events that are
That
happening.
would be good. Love to do it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you for joining me. Please take this minute to view our performance calendar of what's coming up in our area, and I'll be right back with Mark Fennessy to talk about steampunk sculpture, whatever that means. We'll be right back. Spaceships that look like they might have been imagined in the mind of Jules Verne, but are actually crafted from oxygen tanks and other recycled bits and pieces, are the creation of local artist Mark Fennessy. I'm pleased to welcome Mark as this week's featured Fort Wayne artist to learn all about these whimsical and fantastic ships. Mark, welcome to Arts Weekly, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I have to ask you, first of all, in my intro, I keep saying that it's steampunk sculpture.
Yes.
Can you tell me what steampunk means? Because I've heard that thrown around both in theater and in the arts, and I don't have a grasp on what that means.
Okay, well, I don't know that there's actually an absolute for the steampunk art, because there's a lot of creations that are made, and I know that my son, I asked him, I said, Ben, what is this art that I'm actually creating? And he said, oh, Dad, you got to see it. It's called steampunk art. Well, I went out on the computer, called up on the images, and there it was. There's a whole plethora of art that is made out of repurposed items like metal and fabrics and all kinds of things that people are using. But it's to kind of take you back into the industrial world and mystery, and where there's blimps and all kinds of spaceships and all this kind of stuff. And even though I say that, my work is a little bit different than this.
Well, your work is, we're going to get to your work in a minute because I want to talk about your background first for a little bit, but just steampunk, I know from a costume design coming from the theater.
Yes.
When someone does a steampunk costume design, it has an Industrial Revolution eclectic feel.
Yes, it
They'll
does.
sometimes infuse a modern contemporary element with an industrial sort of feel, sort of nondescript.
Absolutely.
So same with what you're talking about. There's an industrial feel to the
Right.
art or to the approach. Okay, so that's steampunk. But let's talk a little bit about your background before we talk about your very interesting art. Have you been an artist all your life? Is it?
I've never classified myself as an artist until recently, but I came from a very artistic family. My dad, he was one who, he did a lot of oil paintings, still work and so forth, and I would go with him and he would paint things like covered bridges, all kinds of neat scenery and so forth.
Still life kind of
Right,
work.
and
Yeah,
I would find myself creating things out in his garage, making things with my hands, you know, and tree forts and just all kinds of crazy things that I would make.
Three-dimensional things.
Right.
Right.
And then you know, you go to school and the teacher says, you know, we're going to art class today, and so you go in there and now we want to teach you how to draw and so forth, you know, and I was complimented on some of my drawings, and I remember it was a very young age where you would sit there and the teacher would review your work and so forth, you know, and I was always attracted to, you know, making things, and I was complimented by what I did. But my entire life has been kind of a creative kind of a personality in person. I make things out of anything.
Are you from Fort Wayne? Did this
I
all start
actually
in
was
Fort Wayne?
raised down in Huntington.
Oh, okay.
Right, raised down there, and I've traveled, and everywhere I've gone, I've kind of seen things that were attractive to me as far as artistic things. We would go into like Chicago and see the Museum of Science and Industry. I mean, that was one of the places that I think as a kid just opened my eyes up to a whole new world of art, and the steampunk culture is a lot of the old locomotives and all that kind of stuff that's up there. So it was kind of an inspiration up there.
And so let's get to talk a little bit about the current work that you're doing. First of all, you've just had a show.
Yes.
At First Presbyterian Church,
That
or
is correct,
theater,
in their gallery.
In their gallery, which is also connected to their theater downstairs.
Right.
And how long did that show run?
Well, actually, it's still going.
Oh, it is?
I talked to them today, and they said that it will go until July the 12th.
Oh, well, I want to make sure our viewers know that that goes on to the 12th and that they can visit it during the day, if I'm not mistaken,
That
when
is
the
correct.
church is open, when the offices are open. And
Right.
I can't impress upon our viewers enough to go see this stuff.
Sure.
The pictures we're going to show are incredible, or have shown a couple, but to see these elements, these sculptures up close, it's so interesting and
Yes.
so intriguing, the pieces that you put together. So you have a show there.
Yes.
And it has 4 major pieces in it, if I'm not mistaken,
There
which
are.
they're themed. Let's start
Right.
there.
Okay.
Because this just isn't a sculpture. You're a storyteller.
Right. There was a, let me just kind of go back a little bit. There was a friend of mine who had, it's a B-17 oxygen tank, and this thing was hanging on his wall in his garage. And when I went in there, because he and I trade, we swap things and buy things off of each other. And so anyways, I went in there and I saw this oxygen tank hanging off of his wall. And it was just something that kind of like jumped out at me, and I knew when I saw this that I could create something out of it. And I just envisioned this spaceship. And so I took it back, and one of the problems was I did not know how to weld. And so one of the guys that work in my shop there, I talked to him and he said, well, you know, Mark, he said, I could teach you how to weld. And because I had that passion to learn how to weld, it came to me very quickly. And so I worked on this one ship for about a year. It was called the Probe. And it was really just a neat ship that I had. And then after I was completed, I completed that, I took it into my office and I hung it off the ceiling. And so when customers would come through, they would come into my office and they would say, what's this, you know? And I would explain to them what I had made. And I had such an outpouring of people just taken back by it that eventually somebody said, well, you know, I have one of those out in my garage. And so he brought it in, and I was thinking, wow, what could I make out of this? So instead of a horizontal one, I turned one up to make it vertical, and then it kind of went from there.
Let's see if there's an image of what we're talking about. I'm sure that we have some images, but I want to see if we specifically have the images of, now that's not the one.
This one here is called the Deep Space Oil Recovery Helicopter. And this one has, there's a whole storyline to these. There is, I think there's a total of 9 ships that I have. And there are 4 of them that are on a rack. And each one of them has its own storyline behind it.
Connected to a major story.
Yeah, that is correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So this one here is called the Extractor, and that's really a cool one because it's actually the oil drilling rig of the fleet. And so as the storyline goes, the Americans left the Earth to find another planet so that we could find a place to live, because the Earth was imploding and we had to get off of the Earth. And so we had built 4 ships to get off of the Earth, and one of them was the Probe, the other one was the Colony, where everyone lives, and this one here, being the Extractor, when we got there on this planet called Cludon, and the reason we call it Cludon is because the aliens that are there inhabiting this planet, they don't have a clue what they've done to us, because they've tried to destroy all of our ships. And so on this one here, we've found an area where we know there's got to be oil deposits, and so it plunges into the earth and extracts the oil out. And we have to have oil for all of our ships. And so this is the oil drilling rig, the Extractor.
Yet again, the battle over oil continues.
Yes, it is.
Yes, there's a theme going on. What are all the pieces, though? I mean, you talked about a tank, but there's a lot of other pieces that you combine into these.
That is correct.
Repurposed, if you will. Here's another image.
And this one here is the, this is an actual bird feeder is what this one is.
Oh.
And these are actual, they have functionality to them even though they are spaceships. This one here, the storyline is that this ship here goes from different areas of this planet, because what we're trying to do is feed the birds. They are bigger than we are as humans, and so we want to use them as transportation. And so,
but let's talk a little bit about what's actually in this sculpture.
Yes.
I see glass.
And there is glass. There's stained glass up there. What we want to make sure is that when these birds come in, they know where to go. So the bluebirds are in there, the finches, the cardinals, and so forth. And down below on the left-hand side there, underneath, there is an actual garden rake kind of a thing.
I see that.
And that is so when this craft lands, it actually scrapes the earth and exposes worms for the robins that are there. On the front, there's a brass propeller. On the back is a corkscrew. It's actually an auger bit that is used for, this can land on water as well.
Did I see the name Fennessy on it?
Fennessy's on there, yes. Kind of like, you know, some of the other, like Harley, I figured I can put Fennessy on there.
If Harley can put their name on it, I can put Fennessy on it.
I'm going to put mine on mine, too.
Absolutely. I don't blame you. Absolutely. They're really beautiful.
Well, thank
you. Do you just go around and collect these materials? Do you have just a garage full of...
Well, it started out small, but then I would have customers that would come in and say, listen, my dad passed away, and I've got a whole garage full of stuff and junk. Would you be interested in any of it? Because I see that you're making some of these things, and I've got rakes like this, and so we have had a lot of people who've just brought things to our shop and dropped them off.
when you say shop, what do you mean? What
Well,
customers do you have?
I own a business called Fennessy's Furniture Restoration, where we strip, refinish, reglue, repair. We do wood carving, wood turning, all these things. It's kind of like a hospital for furniture. And so one day we started to get some customers that would come in and say, hey, I've got a lawn chair that needs to be welded. Can you do that? And so it kind of only made sense for me to offer this service. And in that process of learning how to weld, then we extended that out and said, hey, you know, this is something else that we can do.
Commercially.
Yes.
Right.
And so we've got a welding department in the back.
So these wonderful sculptures that are themed and have certainly seemed to be Hollywood ready, if you ask me. We've got to call somebody in Hollywood.
Sure.
What's the goal for you for where they would live? What's the destination of a place like that?
Well, you know, when you create these kinds of things, it's like, you know, you can't bring this stuff home.
Right.
Because your house is only so big. But I could really see something like this in a major, let's say an airport as an area for conversation, you know, or let's say a restaurant. It would be kind of neat to see something like that.
And if somebody has interest in pursuing that, they can get a hold of you via the email we have up, or telephone 260-637-0039. Well, Mark, thank you for being our featured Fort Wayne artist on Arts Weekly, and I look forward to more of your work.
It's been a privilege.
Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
I'm John O'Connell, Dean of the IPFW College of Visual and Performing Arts. Tune in to the next Arts Weekly when T. Ershmer joins me to spread the word about this year's FAME Art Camp. Then local musician Hope Arthur shares her thoughts about what it takes to be a working professional in the Fort Wayne music scene. For up-to-the-minute arts updates, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And be sure to join us here Thursday evenings at 7:30 here on PBS 39. Thanks for watching Arts Weekly.
Support for Arts Weekly is provided by PBS 39, the Hour Foundation, Martin Tierney, and the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne.
For nearly 60 years, Arts United has worked to bring the rich, diverse talents of our region together through support of the arts, socially, culturally, and economically. Arts United, providing a home for the arts in Northeast Indiana.